If you're not allowed to say a prayer before a public school session, then you're not neutral. You're explicitly anti-Christian, right? Because the things that people do to replace that, they will be religious in nature. They just won't be a prayer, right? It'll sort of look it'll look slightly different. And yeah, I think it's one of the by the way, the things that conservatives have really woken up about in the past 10 years is there is new neutrality, right? We actually need to choose fights in some of these cultural battles. We need to be on the side of good. We can't just be neutral and expect to be left alone. The fight is coming to us whether we want it to or not.
But before we get into our conversation, my name's Eric Metaxas, and this channel exists to bring you a biblical perspective on today's news, culture, and hot-button issues. If you're new here or not, welcome, and be sure to hit the subscribe button and the bell icon so you are notified when new videos get posted. I used to work for Chuck Colson. He was one of my heroes, and then I had the privilege of getting to know him and working for him. And he started something called Evangelicals and Catholics Together. Mm-hmm. And he took a lot of heat from, you're a Catholic and I'm an evangelical. He took a lot of heat from Reformed Protestants who basically said, no, you can't break bread with those, you know, what? Cultists. It's a satanic cult, and the Pope is the Antichrist. And it's interesting because I think part of when we're talking about working class Americans, we're talking about people of faith who don't live in that rarefied world where they're concerned about the Westminster Confession versus, they just know there are godless bureaucrats who are devotedly secular, who don't understand the founders, don't understand religious liberty, sneer at religious liberty. It's now in scare quotes in the New York Times. And we all need to kind of band together for a common vision of what it is to be a freedom-loving American, as the founders were. They were not enforcing their faith, but they knew that without faith, you can't really have virtue and self-government, that somehow these things have to work together.
Yeah. Well, and they also, there were, of course, many, even though there was no federal establishment of religion, there were multiple state establishments of religion at the time of the founding generation. I think they recognized that if you ban all mention of faith from the public square, you erect a new faith in the public square, right? It's just secularism, it's progressivism, it's wokeism, whatever name you want to put on it. I think our founders were very smart, actually, about having a society that, no, you didn't get put to death, right, for not having a particular faith, and that's a good thing, but that doesn't mean you can't talk about Jesus at a public school either.
Well, this is what's so interesting. I think that most people in America get this.
Yes.
But I know that the cultural elites, not only don't they get it, they're horrified at the idea of it, basically. They don't speak that language. And it's why they sneer at Walmart voters and at people dealing with addictions who aren't people of color. Right. They don't have categories for this.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the interesting things that I think ultimately brought me back to my faith, right? It was sort of becoming a husband, a father, thinking about these big issues that I think Christianity is particularly good at dealing with. But it was also just recognizing the more time that I spent with elites, they like to think that they're all rational, that they have no religion. And then the more you realize it's like, actually, you guys have all of the things that you hate about religion you have in your own worldview. You just have none of the moral grounding, the tradition, the rituals, and that's made you all insane.
It is fascinating, isn't it? Because when you use terms like religion, we can have no establishment of religion in the Constitution. People don't understand what you just said, that any understanding of the fundamentals is effectively a religion.
Yeah.
And so if you're a secularist, you do have a religion, but because you don't label it, you don't say I'm a Congregationalist or I'm a this or that, they act as though I'm neutral.
That's right.
But you really cannot be neutral when you're dealing with questions of the human person, when you're dealing with questions of sexuality and marriage. And, these are things that there really is no neutral ground. But let's be honest, they've been rather successful in putting forward the lie that they are neutral on that.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, that's one of the great evils of modern liberalism is this pretense of neutrality when it's not, right? And then we get this, right? Like if you're not allowed to say a prayer before a public school session, then you're not neutral. You're explicitly anti-Christian, right? right? Because the things that people do to replace that, they will be religious in nature. They just won't be a prayer, right? It'll sort of it'll look slightly different. And yeah, I think this is one of by the way, the things that conservatives have really woken up about in the past 10 years is there is new neutrality, right? We actually need to choose fights in some of these cultural battles. We need to be on the side of good. We can't just be neutral and expect to be left alone. The fight is coming to us whether we want it to or not.
And again, this is the great irony of Donald Trump.
Yeah.
The idea that here you have a thrice married, philandering New York, because I know New York, real estate developer who effectively shows the church what courage looks like. I mean, it's an astonishing thing that he was willing to stick his neck out. And even if it had been transactional in the sense that he said, well, they elected me, I want to please the people who elected me, this is important to them. Even if it were only that, it would be spectacular. It would be the free market in politics in action. But I think it was more than that. I think that he identified, I don't know how far back this goes with him, but that somehow he identified with people like the folks that you grew up with.
Yeah, I won't try to psychoanalyze the president, but I definitely don't think it was purely transactional, right? There was clearly some affinity there. And I think you see that even today, right? Trump knows instinctively, and I'm sure you talk to the president, I talk to the president, Trump knows instinctively that the people who are most courageous on behalf of his agenda and what he was trying to do in Washington are very often evangelical Christians, right? Or conservative Catholics. I mean, it really is fascinating to me that a guy who, from the outside appearance, was not a very religious guy, got Christianity and its role in American politics better than anybody.
Well, what I think stunned him, and I was there was a meeting in New York in the summer of 2016 with a lot of evangelical leaders, and Trump was there. And I remember him sort of registering his astonishment at the acceptance and the love in the room for him. Mm-hmm. And if you really are a Christian, you understand what that's called. That's called grace.
Yes.
It's called grace. It's
right.
The antithesis of Pharisaism or legalism. What made you think that you ought to write a memoir? I mean, it's an amazing thing. Your story is amazing in and of itself.
Yeah.
But the idea that you'd go to Iraq, that you'd serve your country, that you'd go to Yale Law School, my goodness, and then decide to write a book telling this story. How did that happen? I mean, were you a big reader growing up? At what point do you decide to do what I, speaking from experience, know is a big deal?
Yeah, I've always loved to read and write. I mean, I read the Bible sort of all the way through when I was 13 or 14, just because I was really wanted to know what it actually said. I had a professor in law school who was politically moderate by my standards, but by the standards of Yale Law School, I think is sort of a radical right-winger. And she encouraged me to turn what was then a paper into a book. And the more that it became a book, the more that it started to incorporate, stories about my past and my family. And
At law school?
At law school.
Are you able to? Can you share the name?
Oh, yeah, it's Amy Chua.
Of this non-communist Yale Law
That's
School?
Right, yeah, who's faced a number of cancel pressure campaigns in the past few years, and one of her great sins, of course, is that she was a mentor to me. But
well, if somebody can promote a white nationalist bigot like J.D. Vance, they have no place at Yale Law School. Let's be honest. Right. Yeah, it's obvious.
So it became a book from there, and the more that it became a book, I started talking to my family a lot. Started asking for stories about things that happened even before I was born, even before my mom was born. And it just became this sort of family investigation almost. Like I learned things, Mama and Papa left Eastern Kentucky when she was 13 and he was 16. She was pregnant at the time. The baby that she had died 6 days after she gave birth to it. We never knew that stuff, right? So you just learned this incredible family story that took my grandparents from Kentucky to Ohio. And I'd also say, just being honest, there was definitely something. I was at Yale Law School. I felt connected to my home, but I realized these elites weren't really totally on board with what was going on in back home. I think it was a good opportunity to just force myself to reckon with the two worlds and how different they were, right? Because think about it. A kid like me, nobody in my family had gone to college. Yeah. Here I am at Yale Law School. Yeah. So it was a good thing. Hopefully it was a good book, but certainly it was good for me and my family, I think, to have been written.
It's always fascinating to me that, when I think of Yale Law School, unfortunately I think of Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton. And it seems to be able to get through Yale as an undergraduate, or particularly at the law school, and to not drink that Kool-Aid is exceedingly rare. Were you? Did you have a moment where you woke up, or did you? In other words, for me, I kind of did drift along with the zeitgeist for some years. I think before I had my awakening and came to Christian faith. So something like that happened to you. Do you remember? Was there a moment or?
Yeah, definitely was. Like, I think I drank the Kool-Aid a little bit. Luckily, I didn't fully drink it, so I was still always, I think, firmly planted in where I came from. But, I think one thing in particular, I remember talking with a couple of classmates about work-life balance, right? This idea that they're obsessed with in Ivy League professional schools. And, a couple of young women were talking about how they really wanted to have a family, but it was so much more important to go and work at a law firm and work 90 hours in a cubicle drafting briefs for corporations. And it sort of hit me like the worldview that dominates here is anti-family, and it's making people miserable. Right, and I never sort of drawn that connection. Right, you think of like feminism. Right, feminism is this idea that women need to be equal and happy, and of course, who disagrees with legal equality or women being happy? And then you start to realize that in application, what it's doing is taking a lot of talented young people and turning them against their own like basic desire for family and tradition and community. And it's like, wait a second, right? This whole ideology that I've been sold, these people don't have it all figured out. They have no idea what's going on, and they're about to lose the country, by the way, as evidenced, of course, by what's happened politically over the past 4 or 5 years. Like that, I think, was my awakening when I realized that these people who sold themselves as having it all figured out, they didn't know what they were doing.
Well, yeah, and that's an understatement, and it's almost funny. I mean, it's tragicomedy because we're seeing now, as we were saying earlier, the kind of outworking of that worldview. It kind of trips along through the decades, and then suddenly it blooms into full-blown, Marxist communism in our streets and violence and selective application of the law, and you think that can't happen in America. And here it is happening now, leading to folks like you running for the Senate, and for all kinds of people. As I speak around the country, tons of people are getting involved in things that they just thought, I don't need to bother with that. I don't need to homeschool my kids. They're going to, and I think people are saying, if I don't get involved now, if I don't get serious, it's over.
Yeah.
Where we've been fiddling while Rome burned, and here we are. It's this bad now. We're at the edge of the abyss.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And of course, I think what's happened the past couple of years has really driven that home, right? Who would have thought that you might have to vaccinate a 5-year-old with what is effectively an experimental vaccine that appears to have some negative health consequences for 5-year-olds? You might have to vaccinate 5-year-olds to send them to school. Who would have thought that we would still 2 years later be having children wear cloth masks? Who would have thought that people would be fired from their job for donating $25 to a conservative political cause? This stuff is happening in our country right now. And this is, again, 5 years ago, Eric, if you and I were sitting here and you told me what was happening right now, I would have said, you're a crazy conspiracy theorist.
Well, sure.
And here we are.
Well,
and
listen, I have
eyes.
lost many friends who think that I am a crazy conspiracy theorist, and it is heartbreaking, frankly. But
they still think that now.
At the end of the day, well, but at the end of the day, you realize what can I do? I have to speak the truth.
Sure.
I have to do the best I can. And you're right. It's nothing less than stunning that we are here. I mean, when you talk about forcing anyone, much less young people, to get vaccines that are in fact not quite vaccines, not fully vetted, and on and on and on and on, and then to have the establishment, including to some extent folks like Donald Trump, whom in every other way I admire, but it's truly. It's a bizarre moment, and we have to mark it as such. Okay, now a lot of people listening are wondering, why do you care about elections when, and I don't mean you, why should one care about elections when one is not confident that the 2020 presidential election was run in a way that reflected the will of the people?
Yeah,
that, again, is one of these horrific moments in our history.
Yeah.
I won't shut up about it. I refuse to. I'm offended that I even should when I know what I know.
You shouldn't. No, I mean, look, I think, and of course, there are very few, even national politicians at this point, who are willing to talk about some of the issues that we saw in 2020, from the Zuckerbucks to the fact that you had, people running multiple loads of ballots as evidenced by geolocation data in the cell phones that we all carry around. So no, I think we should continue to ask questions about it. Well, why care about elections? Maybe let me take this a slightly different direction. So even if we assume, and I think that there are some serious problems in our elections, the very worst thing that you can do is drop out of the process entirely. One of the friends who was very influential in leading me back to my Christian faith that I stepped away from for a time, once told me about a year ago when I was having a conversation not too dissimilar from the one we're having, and I was like, what can we do? What can any one person do? And he said, despair is a sin. And I think about that a lot, that no matter how long the odds are, we are not called as Christians and as people who love this country to despair about it, right? That's giving them what they want.
In fact, we're forbidden.
Exactly.
But that's a huge point. That's a huge point for me, and I've said this a lot. You would know it, but I've spoken about this a lot because there are strains within Christian faith that they kind of make a virtue out of a vice.
Yes.
And they kind of act like, well, it's all going to hell, and I'm ready to go to glory. And you think, well, that's very nice. But if God has told you to stand and fight, then to do anything else with vigor is sinful.
That's
and
right.
A lot of people have kind of abdicated, and they've said, why should I bother? So it's good to hear you say that.
Yeah, there are friends, friends of mine who are very serious Christians. I mean, they're deeply committed to their faith. Who have talked to me about potentially, look, it's all over, right? We're going to move to a commune in some rural part of Ohio or Pennsylvania and just try to wait it out.
Right.
It's like that is not how, I'm sorry, that's not how the devil works, right? Eventually, this is, going back to J.R.R. Tolkien, right? Eventually, your individual shire is going to get attacked. We have to fight when we can, right?
It's just great to hear you say that. And if you weren't already running for Senate, I would say, for the love of Christmas, you need to run for Senate. No, because it is very important that we have leaders that get that, who are willing to say, the odds might be tall, so what?
Yeah.
We don't want to follow Neville Chamberlain. We want to follow Winston Churchill.
Right.
We want to fight because it's simply the right thing to do.
Yep.
But as we were saying, there are a lot of voices out there of people who have decided it really is all going to hell. There's nothing I can do. I'm here to say that's not true. That's a lie from the pit of hell.
Amen to that.
In case you're checking, from the pit of hell, and we need to fight. And I actually believe that because of folks like you, I have tremendous hope for Lincoln's new birth of freedom. I really believe he spoke that prophetically.
Yep.
That he was an American prophet, and that even though it's so long ago, that he was speaking that prophetically, that we have not yet seen a new birth of freedom, and that, in a sense, things had to get this bad to wake up enough people for that.
That's right. I think that's exactly right. And look, the history, not just of this country, right, which is in the grand scale of Christianity is a very brief blip, but the history of Christianity is constant battles, constant periods when things look incredibly dark, and then by some act of providence and the sort of the strength and the courage of men, things turn around. And I think we're going to need both in the coming years, but I think that we have both.
I also think I've seen a lot of people, patriots basically in America, who have seen things get so bad that they themselves recognize that at its heart, this is a spiritual war more than anything
Absolutely.
else.
Yeah, I try to remind myself. So I did a March for Life rally in Cincinnati just a couple of weeks ago, and there were people there who had been marching for life every single day since 1973, the 49th year, right? And it's like, look, if that old woman who can barely walk is marching for life, knowing that maybe, just maybe, the 50th anniversary is when we finally defeat Roe versus Wade, then I need to suck it up, accept that despair is a sin, and do something else with my life.
Well, as I say, it's delightful to have voices like yours, entering the public fray, because that's the temptation. That is the voice of the devil. Lie down, rest, go to sleep. I also think that there are many in the church who are waking up, that what we would call a holy remnant is
Yes.
is praying harder and understanding that we do
That's
have
right.
to get involved.
And the opposition, Eric, is weaker than it has been in a long time. They're most dangerous when they're wounded. But I don't think that the opposition that we face is this all-powerful thing. I think that they realize the institutions they built are crumbling. They realize the will of the people is not with them. The facade, the curtain has been pulled, and we see what's actually going on. Yes, they're dangerous, but they're not all-powerful.
I mean, it reminds me when Reagan said, Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall, and everybody in Foggy Bottom over and over and over said, you can't say that, you can't say that, you mustn't say that. And he too had this kind of prophetic sense that I must say this. This is right and true. And I don't know if he realized it at the time, but I like to think that when he said that, the demons tremble because, in effect, when you say that, you're making it clear that I know that what is pretending to be strong is a tottering fence, and a few voices like ours will shove it down.
Absolutely.
It's ready to go down. So that really is important. It does look like Roe v. Wade effectively will be overturned in June. That's hard. I can't believe I just said that, but it seems true. And it's because, can we say it, of Donald Trump. Can we imagine the three justices that would be sitting on the court if Hillary Clinton had been elected?
Yeah, absolutely. It's absolutely because of Trump and the justices he appointed. And we also have to remember 50 years of work from the pro-life community, right? I mean, this is what is so important for us is we often want to win battles on an electoral time frame. Sometimes it takes a little bit longer. The pro-life movement is the best example of this.
It is amazing. And when we think of civil rights in this country, when we think of the abolition of the slave trade in this country, these are long battles. And the last thing people of faith should ever do is shrink from those battles, even though some people say, oh, you're being political. Yes, I'm being political. I believe life is sacred. I'm sorry. What do you want from me?